Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining in today on this webinar, where we'll be discussing the technical requirements for BIMcloud and see what is actually required, how BIMcloud works. And then towards the second half of the webinar, we'll take a look at the pricing and the availability of BIMcloud for smaller practices in the UK. For those of you who didn't join us on the first webinar that we ran a few weeks ago, just to remind you, BIMcloud is an extension over the BIM server, which allows you to use your ArchiCAD teamwork functionality over the internet from multiple locations at the same time. And it also allows mobile devices like iPads or Android tablets to join in on teamwork messaging from site or from home or from on the go. It also provides users with advanced user management. So it gives an option of centralized user management where we can plug into your existing infrastructure to fetch users from there. And it has also much more detailed user rights management, so you can really fine-tune who's allowed to do what in particular projects. In the BIMcloud, you can also have multiple servers, so you can place servers on key locations, and then these can be accessed across the internet, all controlled by a central manager component, which takes care of user management, both on authorization and authentication functions. So without further ado, let's take a look at what is required to run BIMcloud. Now, BIMcloud does require a little bit more infrastructure than BIM server does, because it's been developed for larger needs, and it's also been developed to be scalable. So one of the most important things you will probably want with BIMcloud is a server-grade operating system, because you will be connecting a lot of devices to that one server. Now, with Windows environments, the desktop editions of Windows are actually limited to 10 concurrent network connections at any time, which is why we recommend running Windows Server for BIMcloud, which has no such limitation. So running Windows Server is important. BIMcloud supports Windows Server 2012 Release 2 and above. So any currently available Windows Server edition is supported. Alternatively, BIMcloud is also available for macOS. So if you've got macOS servers, we can plug into those too. We will require at least 10.11 for the 21 version of BIMcloud to be running on this. Just like with BIM server, because some of your computing will be running on the server, if the server is a server component and not a manager component, we recommend running a quad-core CPU and at least 16 gigabytes of RAM. Similarly to BIM server, disk access is very important. So the faster your disk, the better your experience will be with BIMcloud. On the other end, you will also need to have control of your IT, which is a quite important aspect to consider when migrating to BIMcloud. Because this is a server environment, certain aspects of server management are expected from the IT management who takes care of BIMcloud. Most importantly, if you want to encrypt your data, you will need to do that yourself. BIMcloud does support being encrypted, but it doesn't actually encrypt itself. So you'll need to know how to encrypt the BIMcloud. You'll also need to be able to manage your DNS infrastructure, because it's always a good idea to link to your server nodes using domain names. The next major consideration that is to be made for BIMcloud is your network. A lot of data will be communicated through your network at any point when you're using BIMcloud, because multiple offices might be using the same server to join into the same project. One of the major requirements is to have fully qualified domain names for all member nodes. So every server and every manager within your BIMcloud should have a fully qualified domain name, so it can be definitively found over the internet from any location without having particular problems. It is also important that once the domain name is resolved, you get your net right. So if this server is sitting behind a shared IP address, you want to make sure that the appropriate routing is set up so that all the packets can find your server. You will also need to be able to set up custom ports, because a multitude of ports will be used for BIMcloud whenever we're working with that. BIMcloud itself uses HTTP packets, so every element of BIMcloud, when you're working with a server, is wrapped up into a HTTP packet, and that's how it's communicated over the network. And HTTPS, which is the encrypted version of HTTP, is also supported. Now, in order to encrypt the packets, you will need to do the encryption on your side. So BIMcloud itself is unencrypted, but it supports being encrypted. We encrypt BIMcloud through reverse proxies, which means that an additional web server is required to encrypt these HTTP packets and then shoot them over the internet in an encrypted manner. This technology is called SSL offloading, and depending on your environment, you will either need to have the Internet Information Services set up with application request routing, which is the Windows environment, or on a macOS environment, we recommend Apache or Nginx to be set up as a reverse proxy to route these packets and encrypt them on demand. You do need to have additional ports open when you're encrypting the connections. That will, of course, depend on your already existing environment. So port 443, which is used for HTTPS by default, that can be used to then be routed to the unencrypted port of BIMcloud. However, you want to make sure that these all sit behind the firewall, so no one can actually access the unencrypted ports, and only the encrypted ports are exposed to the rest of the internet. Because we're dealing with HTTP encryption, you will of course need an SSL certificate, which are fairly easy to source nowadays. You can even get free ones from Let's Encrypt, but those do need to be renewed every 3 months. Another consideration to be made for BIMcloud is the centralized user management. Now, if you already have a directory service, which many large corporations will, BIMcloud can simply slot into this. BIMcloud supports LDAP, which stands for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. LDAP is basically a way of speaking to a directory service. Now, BIMcloud itself is set up to be able to speak to Microsoft's Active Directory services over LDAP. So we can speak to Active Directory services, and it's also set up for OpenLDAP as the directory backend. However, any directory backend can actually be connected to and used as long as LDAP is supported by that particular backend. We do recommend Active Directory services if you're on a Windows server, or OpenLDAP if you're on a Unix server like macOS. However, the directory service only authenticates the users. So although the user will get automatically created in BIMcloud when you create these users on your directory service, and then the user's authentication is carried out by the directory service, the user's rights are still assigned within BIMcloud. Now, these can be done through groups. So if you automatically assign a user to a group, then the user can inherit the rights from those groups, essentially automating the process. But the authorization part of the process still is taken care at the BIMcloud level. Now, as you can see, there's a lot of technical considerations that are to be made whenever you're looking at deploying and installing BIMcloud. But the great thing about BIMcloud is that it's flexible. It's been designed to be decentralized and deployed in multiple locations, which means that you can actually have someone else take care of your infrastructure. So you don't actually need to already to possess all of this infrastructure that's required, you can simply let someone else deal with it. And this is exactly what we looked at and identified on the market, that not every practice is prepared to deal with such levels of IT infrastructure. So in order to do that, we have set up our own shared BIMcloud. We call it BIMcloud at Apple Core, and it's going to be available from January 2018, so that's this January. And we've set up a server, which we are happy to share with everyone, where we are running a BIMcloud. Now, this will be available in different constructions for different needs. The main concept is that because BIMcloud is a licensed product, you will own your license. So we don't sub-license BIMcloud to you. You will own your license, which means that you can actually move between the different solutions whenever you like. So if you start off on one of our hosted servers and then decide to actually build your own server in your office, you can just move your license over. That's not a problem. So you own your license, but you use our servers where your licenses reside with us, and your server lease is completely independent from your licenses. So this means that you can move around as you wish. You don't need to invest upfront into large IT infrastructure, and you don't need to deal with the IT infrastructure. So you don't have to constantly keep an eye on it and look after it, which, if you already have an IT department, is not a particular problem. But if you don't have a regular full-time IT department, it's probably not something you want to take home. So our BIMcloud will be available in 3 constructions. The first one is what we call the hosted option. The hosted option is directed at smaller users. So let's look at this scenario where we have 3 users in a practice. They all work in one office, but they regularly work from home as well. In this case, we would recommend the hosted option for them. In the hosted option, these 3 users all share server resources with users from other companies. Now, of course, they don't see each other, so they don't know who's on the server, but they are sharing the server resources with other smaller companies. This is great because this way we can utilize much more of the server's resources, therefore keeping costs down. Because if a server is designed for 20 users, but you only have 3 users, you're essentially throwing 17 users worth of performance away. However, if someone else can take up those 17 users, then you only need to pay for your bit from that server instead of having to pay for the entire thing. Now, on our solution here, we will have to have fair use policies, which are available upon request and will be available for inspection later on. These are basically used to make sure that no one's using more than their fair share from the server. But because everything's shared here, it's the cheapest option. So you can take advantage of all the extra BIMcloud services and all the extra BIMcloud features without you having to look after infrastructure. The alternative is what we'll call the dedicated option. In this case, instead of sharing resources, we will create a server just for your sole use. So this server will be available only to the members of your company. And then whenever you're joining to our cloud, you're joining to that one server where the entire server is dedicated to you. In this case, the limits on what you can do on that server are only set by the resources. So if you filled the entire server, that's entirely up to you. Now, this is a good option for larger accounts. So for example, if you have 6 or 10 users with multiple offices, this is a great solution for you because we still look after the infrastructure, so you don't have to deal with that. But all of it is available to you and you know how much resources you have, so you can plan your projects accordingly. Now, the last option is what's called the deployed option. In this case, instead of joining to our BIMcloud, BIMcloud can also be installed on your existing infrastructure. In this case, you need to take care of your infrastructure. However, we are happy to provide consultation on what is required and how to configure and install BIMcloud. In these cases, of course, there is no usage limit, so BIMcloud itself sets no usage limits. Whatever you set up in your infrastructure is what's available to you and your users, but it does require for you to have or invest in infrastructure. One thing that is good to know about BIMcloud as well is that the BIMX Pro functionality is included with every project that is originating from BIMcloud. So if you publish a project from BIMcloud and then log into that project on your mobile device, BIMX Pro functionality will be available to you. So you can measure, print, and redline, and message your colleagues over the Archicad teamwork messaging options to work together much more closely. So if someone's on site and someone else is in the design office, they can immediately message each other with pictures, ask for clarification on a detail or design, whatever is required.